This is our 1:30 panel for Wisconsin's Roadmap to Zero Carbon. Hope everyone's enjoyed this summit thus far and had a lovely lunch. So today we plan to talk about all the policies, planning, and implications associated with the transition to a zero carbon future. A lot of utilities have goals to reach zero carbon emissions by 2050. Governor Evers has put forward an executive order to get the state to a pathway for zero carbon emissions. And today we're going to meet our panelists, get a background on their organizations and agencies and their roles in clean energy planning. I'm going to do an overview of the recent zero carbon study that Renew Wisconsin and Clean Wisconsin worked on together to get out there. And Commissioner Huebner is going to talk about the strategic energy assessment and the recent modeling that was completed in that report. And then finally, we're going to have more of an informal dialogue talking about themes associated with this zero carbon transition and talking about our reactions to some of the technical modeling, the planning and collaboration that'll be needed to make this zero carbon transition happen. Of course, we'll have some audience Q&A, both in person here and whoever is attending online as well. So first off, for introductions, Commissioner Tyler Huebner was appointed by Governor Tony Evers to be a commissioner at the Public Service Commission in March of 2020 and was reappointed by the governor to a 6-year term began in March 2021. He's a member of the Energy Resources and the Environment Committee in the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners and is currently Wisconsin's representative on the board of organization of MISO states. Before joining the commission, Tyler had been executive director of Renew Wisconsin and was director since 2013. Before that, Tyler worked at the State of Wisconsin Division of Energy Services, and before that, at the United States Department of Energy and Efficiency and Renewable Energy Division. For both the state of Wisconsin and the Federal Department of Energy, Tyler worked in the low-income weatherization program, helping citizens reduce their energy bills. He started his career as a consultant with ICF International. Tyler earned his master's degree in civil and environmental engineering in the atmosphere and energy program at Stanford University, and his bachelor's degree is in electrical engineering from the University of Iowa. Maria Redmond. Maria serves as the director of Wisconsin's Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy and has worked for the state of Wisconsin for 22 years. In addition to helping develop and implement the governor's task force on climate change recommendations, Maria is leading the implementation of the state's first ever clean energy plan. The plan is focused on environmental justice and creates a pathway to deep multi-sector decarbonization and a bustling clean energy economy that supports a diverse workforce and technological innovation. Maria is a certified public manager and holds a BA in psychology and a certificate in African studies from UW-Madison. Taylor McNair. Taylor is a program manager at Gridlab, a national nonprofit that provides technical expertise on the clean energy transition. At Gridlab, Taylor is responsible for the coordination, management, and execution of Gridlab's technical projects. Taylor works with Gridlab's team of experts to provide comprehensive technical grid expertise to policymakers and advocates, focusing on decarbonization, modeling, resource and transmission planning, and clean energy deployment. Before Gridlab, Taylor worked at Bright Power Incorporated, a leading provider of energy management services throughout the United States. Taylor graduated from Emory University with a BBA from Goethe Business School. Did I pronounce that correctly? Close enough. And a double major in environmental sciences. Hi, I'm Andrew Kell. I received an English degree at UW-Oshkosh and served in Peace Corps Kazakhstan. After returning from abroad, I completed a graduate degree from the La Follette School of Public Affairs and earned an EAP certificate through the Nelson Institute. After grad school, I worked at the Public Service Commission for about 10 years on various energy policy issues, and for the last 2 years, I've worked at Renew Wisconsin in policy analysis. So with that, we're going to have some initial opening remarks by our panelists to talk a little bit more about their organization's role in clean energy planning and development, and then we'll start to look at some of the modeling efforts that I referred to earlier. So whoever wants to start first, maybe on far end, Maria, would you like to go first?
Sure, I can go. Is this thing on? Can you all hear me? Okay, great. So thank you. I know you had a lot of choices of where you could be today, so I appreciate you coming here. And I know your brains are probably really full. Deep breath in, deep breath out. It's going to be okay. This is really great work and really exciting times for the state of Wisconsin. So I'm really honored to be able to work directly with the governor's office and our state agency leadership, as well as the technical teams at each agency. If you're not familiar with the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, it was created via Executive Order 38, and really working around policies and programs that can support our transition to a clean energy economy. And we had the privilege, when I say we, I'm an office of one, but we do have some really great staff that are that I was able to bring on to help. I have 3 staff that are here, kind of here and online, that are supporting the work, but we had the great privilege to be able to work with Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes as he chaired the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change, and we were able to get a set of recommendations out to help get the state on a path to addressing climate change through specific recommendations. And within those recommendations, there's a lot of energy-related opportunities. And so we, shortly after the release of the final report related to that, that was released in 2020, we started the clean energy planning process. And that was a very stakeholder-driven effort. It involved at least 14 agencies across the state, our tribal nations, local government, non-governmental organizations, and we were one of 8 states in the U.S. and territories that did not have a clean energy plan. So we do now have a clean energy plan, which is great. It's a blueprint that gets us on a path to 100% carbon-free electricity consumed in 2050, but also recognizes the intercorrelation and the interconnectivity between the power sector and now the transportation sector as we transition to EVs. Our buildings and industry, the deployment of clean energy technology, and the opportunities to look at energy efficiency in the realm of how are we using energy, how can we reduce our energy consumption while looking at other sectors that may be increasing our energy consumption. So, and are transitioning our energy use to other types of other sources, and thinking about like electrification or a transportation system is one of those things that I'm like, as we're trying to move and reduce our carbon emissions in our power sector, if we're building a bigger load with transportation, where do we find that balance, and what does that look like? So we are really thinking about the implementation of the Clean Energy Plan and how that's going to look. This plan has 70 strategies, high-level strategies, but then subset of strategies. If you look, there's like probably over 200 strategies. So one of the things that, we have really, I'm leaning in on our values for this particular effort: justice, equity, and collective action. Justice, ensuring that the benefits of the clean energy transition is felt by all communities in the state, especially those that have been disproportionately impacted by climate change and pollution. Equity, making sure that that we have significant involvement of all people in Wisconsin to participate in our clean energy transition. And collective action. The federal government, the state government, our local governments are all engaged, but the reality is energy touches everyone. And we all need to be working on this. I may have said it like 3 times this morning on the panel that I was on, that like this is an effort that will require all of us. And so the state's not just going to get it done. We have everyone at the table to get this done. So I'll stop there. I could talk about this for a whole entire session, but I'm so honored to be able to be here with you today and be with this distinguished panel. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Great. I'm Commissioner Tyler Huebner. As Andrew said, I used to work for Renew, so it was great waking up today, being able to come to the conference, not having to have spent months planning and detailing and worrying about the weather. And, it's nice to just be an attendee and not have to do the planning. But kudos to Andrew and the team for getting such an audience. It's great to see a lot of the folks that I know and meet new folks as well. I also want to recognize we've got a number of public service commissioners or staff here. So I don't know if you can raise your hand, can get a sense. Joe Pater was in the back earlier, but we've got, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different folks who work at the Public Service Commission. Just in this panel, I know there's more around. Our chairperson, Becky Vach, is at the conference. So we are here. We're here to learn, but we're a lot of us are on panels and providing information where we can as well. So engage with them if you have specific questions on anything. So we are an agency of the state of Wisconsin. We regulate about 1,000 utilities. About 100 of those are electric and natural gas utilities. Roughly 500 are water utilities, and then there's another 400 or so telecom utilities. We don't directly regulate the pricing and rates of telecom anymore, but we do regulate certain aspects of service. And that strand of continued pseudo-regulation has enabled the state PSC to be the agency where we do broadband expansion grants. So this year, as Maria made us take a collective breath because now we're in the year of mental health. Yep. But about 2 or 3 years ago, Governor Evers declared the year of broadband expansion. And so that is an initiative that is a big part of what the PSC is doing right now. But we're here to talk about energy. We're here to talk about roadmaps to zero carbon. We have a docket that we opened over 2 years ago now called the Roadmap to Zero Carbon. One of the things we're doing under that is looking at performance-based rate making and the opportunities to incentivize different things on this path. We also did a series of dockets related to avoided costs or buyback rates for generators that homes, farms, businesses, et cetera, may own and are selling power back to the utility. We are underway on PSC 119, which is the interconnection rules. We are far down the path of a rulemaking on that. I'll talk a little bit about our strategic energy assessment. So every 2 years we do a legislatively mandated report on electric reliability and adequacy, and we cover a lot of topics under that to make sure that we're covering the bandwidth that we need to cover, especially with the energy industry clearly in a transition. We've got our regulated side where we authorize rates for utilities. We have rate cases. We also regulate and issue permits for any construction project greater than 100 megawatts or greater in the state of Wisconsin, whether that's solar, wind, natural gas, anything that's 100 megawatts or larger comes through us, as well as many transmission lines. Then we have the non-regulated side. We also house the Office of Energy Innovation. And through that office, we oversee the Focus on Energy program. So that's our statewide energy efficiency and renewable energy program, giving incentives, education, technical assistance to essentially the whole state. There's a few electric co-ops that run their own programs, but more or less a statewide program for energy efficiency and renewables on your property, on your in your buildings, local governments, farms, et cetera. We also have grant programs and through the State Energy Office. So each state plus DC plus 5 territories has a federally designated State Energy Office. That is a recipient of federal funds. Usually it's about $1 million a year. We have been repurposing past Recovery Act money that had gone out once, come back as repaid loans. Now it's going back out as grants through our energy innovation grant program. But that is going to be the recipient for, 2 programs of about $75 million each, right? So over the next, through the Inflation Reduction Act, there's about $150 million coming through this office to run the homes program, which is efficiency and rebates, as well as, I don't know the acronym, but it's the electrification program under IRA. So this office is going to be deeply engaged in the types of technology deployment that we're going to talk about today. And I think that ends my opening remarks. So excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor McNair. I'm the program manager at Gridlab. Again, just to echo everyone else's thanks and gratitude for having me. I'm very grateful to be here. It's my first time in Madison. Andrew brought the snow as promised. Yes. Something I'm not used to seeing very much because I live in California. So I'm grateful for that warm welcome.
We'll get you some skis. Don will take you out after the summit, cross-country ski.
Excellent.
On the lake.
So Gridlab. Gridlab is a national nonprofit. We basically exist to provide technical assistance, technical expertise, engineering support to clean energy advocates, to policymakers, to regulators, to energy offices all across the country. So I have the good fortune of working on these sort of complicated energy transition issues all over the place. A lot of my kind of bread and butter work is supporting decarbonization efforts, supporting technical road mapping, and supporting analysis of how utilities and local governments or local communities and states are beginning the transition or advancing the transition to 100% clean electricity and beyond, which is sort of how I came to find Renew. We were a funder and sort of program manager on the study that Andrew's going to spend a little bit more time talking about in just a few minutes. And we get to borrow that expertise from similar work that we do across the country. So I've been involved in resource planning and decarbonization analysis, not just in Wisconsin now, but also in many neighboring states like Minnesota, as well as other places that are dealing with similar but very different, but similarly complex energy transition challenges like New Mexico or Virginia, the Carolinas, Oregon, et cetera. One of the venues where I operate most closely is in front of public utility commissions. So one of the things that Gridlab is sort of known for these days is making commissioners' jobs a lot harder and a lot more complicated by bringing in new expert witnesses, by bringing in more modeling, more technical analysis. Really load up those dockets so they have plenty to read. And we spend a lot of time dealing with those resource planning dockets. There's one sort of regulatory issue that Wisconsinites may not be all that familiar with, which is integrated resource plans, although you have something similar, but also something that I think we'll spend some time talking about. I've participated in dockets like those, probably in 15 or 20 different states, and we've sort of borrowed some of those planning principles, understanding how the electric utilities and sort of the accompanying sectors that of demand are going to have to change and plan appropriately for this rapidly evolving clean energy transition. So I guess with that, I think we're going to get right into some slides, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about these roadmaps that we have planned.
I just noticed there's people standing in the back. There's plenty of seats up here in the front it's like church. Just move to the front. No judgments if you get up and leave early too. Just come on up.
Well, thank you to all our panelists for their opening remarks. As you can see, we have a very distinguished panel that has a variety of perspectives and backgrounds in state government and working on projects to help state government make decisions on important clean energy policy decisions. So that being said, like I stated on the agenda, I got to talk into the microphone. I'm going to provide an overview of our zero carbon study. We don't have the time to go through all the details, but some of the high-level results that I'd like to share with you today. Commissioner Huebner is going to go over some of the modeling done in the strategic energy assessment, and then we'll wrap up some of the major themes with regards to zero carbon planning going forward. So, looking at the zero carbon study. In particular, today we're going to look at the general approach or scenario planning that was put forward for the modeler to model. Some of the results of the modeling. I'm starting to look at the end, the costs and benefits associated with this clean energy transition or zero carbon emissions by 2050. So these are the major organizations that were involved in the study. So it kind of started with Renew Wisconsin and Clean Wisconsin collaborating with each other, securing some initial funding for the study, and working with Gridlab to procure the services of experts who have utility expansion planning models to look at the grid as it evolves and changes with regards to electrification and how resources are integrated to provide reliable service 24/7, 365 throughout the year. So Evolved Energy Research provide that technical modeling, and I'm sorry I didn't include Cambridge Econometrics, also provided the economic modeling to look at how does this impact our economy going forward with regards to gross state product, with regards to employment, and other economic impacts as well. So at a glance, like I said, it was scenario modeling. We established a baseline or status quo. What if there were no major policy changes? It's not really realistic because we know utilities are investing in clean energy resources. The transition is happening, but it really takes a baseline if not much incremental change were to happen, just so we have a baseline for basis of comparison. Then after that, we looked at a 100% clean electricity scenario, in which case we don't forecast much beneficial electrification, so just kind of status quo with higher penetrations of electric vehicles and heat pumps, for example. But we focus entirely on the decarbonization of the electric grid. So it provides another good basis of modeling. And we found, compared to the next scenario, which is the net zero economy-wide scenario, that you only achieve about a quarter of the emission reductions to get to net zero through focusing only on 100% clean electricity, because that's not helping out with the transportation and building sectors that still use fossil fuels for their power, for their energy needs. And then starting with net zero economy-wide being the base assumption, we had several sub-scenarios that achieved zero carbon emissions by 2050, but that additionally concentrated on no transmission expansion, that looked at accelerated clean electricity occurring, that looked at delayed action, or in which case we have lower deployment of clean energy resources between now and 2040, for example, and we have to really catch up quickly, and what are the impacts associated with that type of transition. And finally, a limited coal and gas scenario, in which case there were prohibitions on the development of coal, gas, and other types of fossil fuel, especially in the generating sector going forward, and what are the impacts of that scenario. For the purposes of today, like I said, I can't describe every detail of the study. So as a result, we're going to be focusing on the net zero economy-wide, in which case there are no policy or technical impingements put on the model. It will choose the most efficient resources, the most cost-effective resources, and ensure that Wisconsin gets to a zero carbon future economy-wide. If you do want to look at the model, study results, you can go to our website in particular. We have a sub-web page there. You can get all these resources, the technical report, economic impacts report, policy summary report, as well as a blog and fact sheet. We've got copies of the fact sheet right here you can pick up afterwards, also at the main table outside. So, beneficial electrification. We talked about electrification, and why is it called beneficial electrification? Well, if you're looking at the transportation sector, you can't fully decarbonize gasoline, right? So, or very cost effectively, that is, at least. So, the idea is, in order to get to a net zero economy-wide future, we've got to decarbonize the electric grid, and then we've got to leverage the decarbonized electric grid to power vehicles, to power homes for heating and cooling throughout the year. And this will then allow us to get to zero carbon emissions. This is going to be a key assumption when we start to look at the impacts here, because if you look at the 100% clean electricity scenario, you only get a quarter of the emission reductions needed, and you also get relatively minor expansion of the grid resources needed. So, as we look at the result here, on the left is pretty much a snapshot of the resources that we have in 2022 for serving Wisconsin's electricity usage. So this is a supply bar chart on the left-hand side. I'm not going to go through the details there, but it's mostly fossil fuel generating capacity. On the right-hand side is 2050 resources needed for a net zero economy-wide. As you can see, it's a huge expansion of resources, clean energy resources, that'll be needed between now and 2050. And we'll go in the details of that in the next chart, but I just really wanted to show you, just to give you an idea of the expansion that's going to be required if we fully electrify vehicles, we fully electrify buildings, especially in Wisconsin for heating purposes, the new electricity demand that will be required. The modeling saw that if you look on a bottom-up, end user, appliance by appliance, vehicle by vehicle, counting up of all the demand of these new resources, there's 166% load growth between now and 2050. It's astronomical. That's well over doubling the amount of electricity that we consume right here in the state of Wisconsin. And this, of course, requires an unprecedented amount of clean energy resource development here in the state of Wisconsin, as well as outside the state, as we'll see in a moment. So here is that same bar chart that was on the right-hand side, showing a snapshot of 2050 broken out. And we've got solar resources in the state of Wisconsin, about 28.3 gigawatts of solar, over 21 gigawatts of wind in the state of Wisconsin. And then outside of the state of Wisconsin, we will be importing about over 9 gigawatts of solar. In wind, we will import over 6 gigawatts of wind. And additionally, for, again, reliable electricity, 24/7, 365, we're going to need balancing and storage resources. So storage resources, almost 7 gigawatts of storage resources, clean gas, over 7 gigawatts of clean gas. And then on the customer side of the meter, a lot of dual fuel boilers, rooftop solar, and hydrogen resources as well, oftentimes with industrial customer classes that can afford to make these investments to serve their load and provide resources to the grid as well. And basically the model looked at status quo treatment of hydro generating power as well as nuclear power and other resources as well that are zero carbon. So the one main thing to look at and to consider here is the imports, right? So the model is going to choose to import over 9 gigawatts of solar and over 6 gigawatts of wind. It's going to require a lot more transmission. The model found about 3 to 4 times the amount of transmission that Wisconsin currently has will be needed to serve these resources that will be coming from out of state. The model found that this is the most cost-effective approach to achieve a zero-carbon future by 2050. We did, like I said, model another sub-scenario that had no transmission expansion, which required not only the imported resources to be sited here in the state of Wisconsin, but because the capacity factors would be lower in the state of Wisconsin, they would require even more resources to be sited here in Wisconsin, and there would be a net over $1 billion of costs economy-wide that would be driven as a result of no transmission expansion, just as one example. The other one thing I wanted to point out here is the 2.5 gigawatts of rooftop solar. Now, that assumption is based on, many of you may know, the Cadmus rooftop solar potential study that Cadmus put together for the benefit of Focus on Energy and the Public Service Commission. And the modelers from Evolved basically looked at the core assumptions in this study that looked at what's the physical capacity potential for rooftop solar in the state of Wisconsin, and then based on economics and the most favorable possible policies such as net metering, buyback rates, siting requirements, making it easier for residential and business customers to site rooftop solar, how much potentially could we have in the state of Wisconsin? They took those assumptions and then extrapolated out to the year 2050 and got to the 2.5 gigawatts of solar listed here, which we can see as a slice of the pie. And that, to me, again, emphasizes It's a slice of this portfolio pie. It's a very important portion of that pie that we obviously fight for with regards to policies to support solar at the distribution level, but it is only a portion of the pie that we need to, especially with beneficial electrification coming down the pike, support a clean energy future and one that's fully decarbonized in all sectors of the economy. So with that, I just want to take a pause, and if our panelists have any reactions to especially the last couple of slides with regards to this huge jump. This is, again, a zero carbon economy-wide model result, and that expansion, and then this pie in particular. Any initial kind of knee-jerk reactions that our panelists have?
I mean, I can offer some initial sort of insights just from what we gleaned from the study. Based on what you said, Andrew, I think for me, there were two really important takeaways from this analysis. I think the first one has been well articulated. From today until 2050, we see load growth of 166%. That's just a pretty outstanding increase in generating capacity and an extremely hard challenge for electricity providers to meet. Obviously, we have a lot of time to do it, but that's growing load 3 or 4% each year, which is the fastest load growth that we've probably ever seen in this country. Sorry? Yeah. Yes. It's a massive increase in capacity.
Well, there's a difference between load growth and then on the demand side, and then supply growth on the supply side. Well, we can talk about that on the side, but you need an order of magnitude because there's capacity factor differentiation in resources. You need even more growth on the supply side than what the demand side is showing.
Yeah. So I mean, the point of that is that the numbers we're talking about are large and but if we're going to meet our climate goals, if we're going to meet net zero targets, this is proving to be the most cost-effective way to do it. We ran a scenario that could basically be considered our delayed scenario, which is our poor energy efficiency. It's our slow transition scenario, basically. That scenario comes out as $3 billion a year more expensive than this net zero approach. And that's largely because of the remaining fossil fuels in the economy to fuel things like our buildings, our vehicles, and some industrial processes. So while this is sort of a massive transition, our analysis shows that growing the electric sector in combination with this highly efficient gains in transportation and buildings and industry is particularly cost effective. And then the second point, I think, is necessary to reiterate is that Wisconsin would not be going this alone. Wisconsin is connected to MISO, which is connected to the broader Eastern Interconnect. Right now, perhaps we don't share resources as best we can, but in a 2050 future, we've modeled a pathway in which we are, very well connected to the rest of the country, really, in exchanging power. One sort of critical outcome of the analysis is that every transmission corridor that Wisconsin has with its neighbors grows to its maximum potential that the model allows. That means 6 gigawatts of additional transfers to Minnesota, 6 gigawatts of additional transfer to other parts of MISO. It's again a massive expansion, but it's a key requirement in meeting the reliability challenges. For example, on days like this when maybe Wisconsin is not generating all of its solar that it could. Perhaps Louisiana, which is connected to the MISO grid, is generating a lot of that electricity. But transmission is necessary to make that happen. So,
thank you. All right, so just to kind of cut time a little bit, we spent a little more time than I expected on the technical results overview. So here's some of the costs and benefits. Looking at the direct costs and benefits of this zero carbon transition by 2050 is pretty much a wash, a 1-to-1 ratio with regards to direct costs that have to be occurred by utilities, by consumers for electric vehicles and heat pumps, but then the benefits are avoided fossil fuel consumption and the costs associated with that. But then once you consider all the benefits of the economy, health, and even if you add a number on CO2, you can monetize CO2 reductions. There's additional benefits there. Jenna Green, she's our energy policy fellow. She'll be putting together a cost-benefit analysis to supplement the report that's put together. So look forward to that maybe sometime later this spring. That being said, I want to transition now to Commissioner Huebner to go over the SEA modeling.
Yeah, I thought it would be helpful just to put a few slides together. We do, as I mentioned, every couple of years, a strategic energy assessment. I have a disclaimer that I can't talk about any open dockets, but we're going to abide by that, but quickly move forward. So we looked at, this is looking at where we're at now in blue for these different resources: coal, nuclear, natural gas, hydroelectric, biomass, wind, and solar. And we're, based on approvals that have happened and utility filed plans, where we expect to be by 2028. And so I just thought that this was maybe a helpful starting point. This graph is in the report. For the purposes of this audience, you can see the amount of coal going down by about half, and the amount of solar coming from very low numbers up to a relatively substantial number by 2028. I also wanted to highlight, let's see if here we go. Our major electric suppliers in the state and providers, based again on the information that they've provided, where 2028, this analysis looks out 6 years, so 2028 is the end year of this analysis, would put us at about a 58% reduction in carbon versus a 2005 baseline. So you think about global, targets, national targets, Governor Evers' targets, from a baseline of 2005, if these plans hold true, you're looking at a 58% carbon reduction from the electric sector only, not the full economy, electric sector only, by 2028. That's, which is substantial in my view. Okay, now into the comparison with Andrew's modeling. This, again, is electric sector. So we had our engineering staff, run some models as well. This is a different modeling program than Taylor used. This is a GEIS. It's been around for a long time. Electric generation expansion analysis and scenarios, something like this. EGEAS. So we looked at 3 futures. Future 1 is 40% carbon reductions by 2039, which we're obviously on pace to beat that. Okay. The second future is 60% by 2039. The third future is 80% by 2039. And then the other metric is the load growth, and that's related to the electrification. So moderate load growth, more load growth, quite a bit of load growth. So those are what the 3 scenarios show us. So under future number 1, in order to meet the electric requirements of the state of Wisconsin and make sure we've got enough electricity for our customers every day of the year, including days like today, this is what this model showed. So again, we're at about 17,000 megawatts today. Andrew's slide, I think, was at about 83,000 total capacity megawatts under an economy-wide. So again, looking just at electric sector, coming with 17 gigawatts in mind, you would add about 2.5 gigawatts of natural gas or some kind of combustible fuel. It could be a clean fuel, could be a zero carbon fuel, but something combustible. You'd add about 1 gigawatt of solar and battery and about 0.5 gigawatt of solar. So that would get the job done. You'd get 40% carbon reduction with that expected load growth. If you want more carbon reduction and more load growth, future 2, you start building more gas, more natural gas, or again, some kind of combustible fuel. Again, this is just to meet the adequacy, not an environmental goal beyond the 60%, not a net zero, but just the adequacy of providing people what they need. And you'd actually do less solar and battery and about the same amount of solar. So these are interesting results, super contrast. Now look what happens when you start applying the wrench to reduce carbon emissions. Down to 80% with substantial load growth, lots of electrification. It entirely flips on its head. You still have some natural gas, but you have a much more substantial amount, about 3 gigawatts of solar and battery, 3.5 gigawatts of standalone battery, over 4 gigawatts of standalone solar, and a humongous amount of wind. And this is really intuitive. This makes sense, right? Because solar is really challenged in the winter. But with heat pumps, you're going to actually be raising the electric usage in the winter. I think it was, I can't remember what panel or if it was in the front stage, but they showed, my usage of my building with my heat pump and my solar production and how it all nets out. And the solar production's relatively low in the winter months and high in the summer. Well, you flip your usage on head when you use a heat pump. I have a heat pump at my house, okay? So I'm looking at this with my own 2 eyes. I got solar PV and a heat pump. And what are you going to do in the winter? And that's why the model spits out natural gas. When you don't have as tight of carbon reductions, you're basically replacing coal with natural gas, less carbon, but something that you can control as far as when you want to generate, how much you use it. But if you wrench down the carbon, GIS says build a bunch of wind. So I think that's interesting. A lot more wind, I think, than I think your model had 21 gigawatts of wind, but 28 gigawatts of solar. And so you can see there's a battle of the models happening between a GIS and the modeling tool that Taylor used. So that's, I think, all I had to say. Andrew, back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Huebner.
I think so.
Can you hear me? There we go. So yeah, we just want to have a dialogue now in reaction to some of the modeling results that we had just presented to you all. I actually want to skip to planning. I know strategic energy assessments, we talk about IRPs in other states that Taylor was describing, the clean energy plan. So I just want to get your reactions as far as the planning and coordination and all of the partnerships that will be needed in this clean energy transition.
I think it's essential to ensure that we are planning for the future. If you don't have a plan, you don't know where you're going, right? Or you're just kind of roaming. And I think there's so much opportunity now with Bill and Ira, our new favorite uncles and aunts with lots of money. I think that we have to be thinking about what our transition looks like, and looking at the modeling, even though they're battling each other, it really puts in perspective the different scenarios that we can move as we can move forward, and that the funding and lining up the funding that's coming federally with, is it wind or is it, when we're talking about the clean energy plan, we were like, when we first put it together, it's an all of the above approach, right? We have so much opportunity here in the state, and we're spending so much money on our energy needs, and what can we do to ensure that we're producing our energy here in Wisconsin the most cost-effective way, and also seeing those social benefits. But a lot of that has to be mapped out, and thinking about the planning that we're doing now and today, and the action that we're creating does have an effect in the future. But think about the technology differences that you're going to have between now, 5-10 years from now. And so we have to continue to plan to be able to integrate that technology and to continue to foster the transition along the way throughout the years, knowing that the resources are going to be different, our political environment may be different. There's just lots of variables. So planning is super essential, and it has to be collectively done. So we did modeling within the clean energy plan, but that's that's a snapshot in time, right? So that, again, we have to this modeling in real time is super important to be informative of our future.
Yeah, I'll just say we've got we used to have in the state of Wisconsin what was called advanced plan. It was more of an integrated resource plan. The legislature changed that requirement, and now it's the strategic energy assessment. So we do that process. Most of our neighbors have integrated resource planning, which is more rigorous, and we don't do that. And there's pros and cons to that. You can get an IRP with outdated data and start running down the road, and then the numbers change. And that's kind of what happened over a decade when solar prices kept coming down, but utilities kept generally across the country proposing natural gas. And then you get to the case and you're like, well, wait a minute, your solar assumptions are 3 times higher than the market prices these days. So it can go both ways. And so if that's a choice the legislature wants to make to have that planning, right now, we have what we have, and the utilities are understanding the fleet change that's underway. And when you retire a larger unit, it just requires them, and they have engaged more sophisticated models to bring those different portfolios of resources in front of us. So we've taken those one at a time. It's not in a planning docket, but it's one at a time, and we've looked at those. And we will continue to work with Maria, with other state agencies, and across the board in a variety of dockets. And we do have our roadmap to zero carbon docket. Right now that's kind of gotten focused on performance-based rate making, but it is a very generic docket that can look at other things as well. So that docket will remain open. So Taylor, close us out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's your point that there are pros and cons to IRPs and to heavily regulated planning dockets. I have seen them firsthand. There are IRP rules that work very well. There are IRP rules that are less stringent than the SEAs, for example.
Right.
So the devil is really in the details. I will say. One of the best things that does come out of an IRP or from a strong resource planning docket or regulated venue is just transparency. You can understand why the utility is making the decisions that it's making. What are their solar assumptions? What are they assuming the cost of solar is going to be next year and 5 years and 10 years? What are the fuel prices for natural gas? And how are they predicting that's going to change? Those types of factors have pretty dramatic implications for the models, for how the model chooses a resource, but also for how the utility chooses how to invest or when to invest in a resource. So that transparency is key. But there are challenges with these dockets. We were engaged in the just next door in the Minnesota Excel IRP, the docket. I don't know if someone here can correct me. Maybe I think I saw Will there, but it was a 2-year docket for a plan that has to be renewed every 2 years, anyways. Mm-hmm. But that transparency ended in results. There was such a robust record. There was such robust intervention. That many of our interveners submitted alternative proposals to a retiring coal plant. That retiring coal plant is going to be replaced with a combination of solar and new transmission and battery storage, as opposed to the gas plant that was proposed by the utility. In fact, I actually just read today that Excel has signed a potential PPA with Form Energy, which is a long duration storage provider. They're planning on building a 1,000 megawatt hour battery at that site. And that type of outcome is because of a robust and transparent planning process.
Well, thank you. So I know we were kind of running over time. Maybe we can take a couple of questions in the room here. Mike, can you assist with the microphone?
Yeah, we just have time for maybe 2 questions. I'm going to volunteer Andrew to answer questions through the WOVA app if you guys, or he'll stick around afterwards because we're out of time. But let's hit just 2 questions real quick.
Does either your roadmap or your battling models include green hydrogen as a storage mechanism?
Yeah, ours certainly does. In our net zero economy-wide scenario, the model ends up building about 2 gigawatts of hydrogen and electrolysis that's used as both an alternative fuel. So hydrogen can be combined with other elements to produce fuels that can burn in turbines or run vehicles. It's also used as a storage or balancing resource, as you mentioned. So that electrolysis can take otherwise curtailed renewable energy, store it in a fuel, and then burn it or to be used otherwise. So that's one unique application of Evolve's model, is they sort of combine the fuel sector with the electric sector.
We're going to increase the number of facilities by 5 times, I think, or whatever the total gigawatts. So right now it seems like we're seeing a lot of NIMBYism occurring just on the few projects that we have going around the state. So I'm wondering, how many additional wind farms, solar farms that are significant, let's say over 5 megawatts, are we going to see? And is that going to be an issue moving forward in terms of NIMBYism?
Sounds like a question for Andrew.
Yeah.
Yes, it will be a problem.
All right, thanks a lot, Andrew. Appreciate it.
It's one that we can address, though. If we all collaborate and work together. We are working on updating our agriculture and land use fact sheet to talk about how this 28 gigawatts of solar and additional gigawatts, 21 gigawatts of wind, they're cited in Wisconsin, how much agricultural land use that actually occurs as a minor fraction of total agricultural land that's available to the state of Wisconsin.
I just want to toss in there, too, that we're also starting to have discussions related to offshore wind in the Great Lakes. And so the possibility of that, you might reduce, while it'll take years and years and years to get to that point, that is a substantial opportunity. So,
Thanks a lot. Let's give a hand for our presenters.
Thanks again for attending. Sorry we went long and didn't have a lot of time for questions, but you can talk with me later if you're interested in the zero carbon study.